Okay, and now we have another guest who's going to come and talk to us about the Amicus brief that he is working on. Nick, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and talk a little about the institution you're with and how you got involved in writing this Amicus brief.
Yeah, terrific. And thanks so much for having me on the show. It's really great to be here. So I'm Nick Stephanopoulos. I'm a law professor at Harvard Law School. And I wrote this brief on behalf of myself and Joey Chen, who's a political scientist at the University of Michigan. So the background here for Joey and me is that we have a lot of experience using computer simulations in the redistricting context. That just refers to using a computer algorithm to spit out lots and lots of maps for a given state based on whatever instructions we give the algorithm. And so Joey and I have done this in the partisan gerrymandering context. And we've also written 2 articles about the uses of redistricting algorithms in the race and redistricting context as well. So the South Carolina racial gerrymandering case here is really interesting because it's the first one of its kind to reach the Supreme Court, where the parties have used this kind of computer algorithm evidence as one piece of the puzzle, as a way of showing that race predominated in the construction of the first congressional district in South Carolina. It's certainly not the only kind of evidence the plaintiffs had, but it was one useful piece of the puzzle for them. And so Joey and I decided to write our brief to really zero in on this particular technique, the computational redistricting, and to educate the court about how this technique has been used previously and why it's a very helpful technique for shedding light on the motives of line drawers in a given state. So I can go on. That's a bit of background here about the method and Joey and me and why we thought it made sense for us to be the people submitting this amicus brief to the court in light of our prior experience with this method.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about maps because I was involved with some of the organizations that were trying to educate the public more about the redistricting process. And so we did have some folks who learned about map making and so forth. Most of us didn't get that far. So what is it that we need to know about the process of map making and what its purpose can be and how that purpose can be used for good or ill in terms of setting up the final boundaries?
Yeah, so you mentioned the purpose, right? And the purpose of the map is the most important issue in this kind of a racial gerrymandering case. The big legal issue is whether it was race or something else, like politics, for example, that predominantly explains the shape of the first congressional district. And so the plaintiffs pointed out, hey, look, if you examine the boundaries of the first district, it's trying really hard to avoid pockets of Black population in and around Charleston, South Carolina. It's wiggling in a very strange way that certainly looks like it's trying to artificially suppress the Black population of that district. So South Carolina says, you're wrong. We have lots of non-racial motives for that district. We're just trying to respect county boundaries. We're trying to draw just districts that look nice. Maybe we even have a political, not a racial motive for this district. As the real power of the computer algorithm is that you can tell the algorithm, okay, do every non-racial thing that South Carolina says it was trying to do. Come up with districts that are just as compact, just as respectful of county boundaries and city boundaries, but don't consider race. And then let's look at the racial makeup of the real District 1 compared to the racial makeup of hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of computer-generated maps. And when you do that in South Carolina for this map, it turns out that the computer-generated maps always have an equivalent to District 1 with a larger Black population. So the real District 1 has an artificially white, like a less Black population than just about every single one of the thousands of districts that are accomplishing all of the state's non-racial goals. And so the real power of this technique is just to say, hey, look, we controlled for every single non-racial thing you were doing, and we still see this enormous difference in demographics between the actual District 1 and all of the analogs in the computer simulations. That's pretty good evidence that race must have actually predominated when you drew District 1.
My, that's pretty amazing as a piece of evidence. I've heard lots of things today, but that's one that I think is going to really capture a lot of attention. I also want to ask for those who don't know exactly what an algorithm is, what would be a good way to clarify that for them?
Really just a set of instructions for a computer program. We have this computer program that's able to spit out district maps for any state, but you've got to give the computer program instructions. You have to tell it, make sure all the districts have the same population, make sure their compactness score isn't above some level or below some level, make sure you're not unnecessarily breaking up counties or cities or what have you. And so all I mean by an algorithm is the set of instructions that we give to the computer program that then enable the computer program to randomly generate all of these different district maps.
I think that's fantastic, just in terms of all the evidence that I have heard. So are you going to be one of the people who will present this information? Because many people don't really know how an amicus brief works. So is that just a stack of documents that are given to the court, or is someone arguing in front of the court, and are you or another attorney arguing that in front of the court next week, or how exactly will that work?
Yeah, so in very rare cases, the Supreme Court or a court might ask an amicus to speak. It happens every once in a while, but almost always, 99% of the time, unfortunately, it is just a stack of documents that are sent to the court. So Joey and I, along with quite a few other parties, have written these amicus briefs. They're filed with the court, and the clerks and often the justices read the amicus briefs, but we as amici don't have a chance to actually argue in front of the court. We can nevertheless have yeah, exactly. We can nevertheless have an influence. So it's very common for the Supreme Court to cite amicus briefs in its decisions, or even in oral argument. Like both in decisions and in oral arguments, I've seen the court refer to amicus briefs and often find points in those briefs to be very persuasive. So amici can certainly have an influence, even though they're not standing up and speaking in front of the court typically.
Right. Now, this area of evidence that you're talking about, what do you think because we know we're looking for a decision that will impact Congressional District 1 in South Carolina. What do you think the impact might be for people who live outside of South Carolina? And even in terms of using this kind of evidence in other cases to protect voting rights, what do you see the future benefits of using that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if the court ends up saying something positive about this method, then we could certainly see this method being used in additional racial gerrymandering cases, Voting Rights Act cases, other kinds of redistricting cases in other states. So, in the case at hand, the stakes are limited to South Carolina. Mm-hmm. But of course, whenever the Supreme Court issues a decision, people read the decision and cite the decision and rely on the decision. And so if the court were to say, we're convinced District 1 is a racial gerrymander, in part because of this computer algorithmic evidence, I wouldn't be surprised at all if lawyers and experts and litigants in other states also began to use this method. They already have to some extent, but if the court gives its stamp of approval to this method, then we're likely to see a lot more use of it in other states going forward.
Well, I want to thank you for your time in not only speaking with me today, but your time in putting together this amicus brief and your partnership that made it possible for y'all to exchange ideas and bring that to the table, making this one of, I think there might have been 10 or so amicus briefs in this particular case. But this is the one that's technology oriented. So do you finally, do you think there's any connection? A lot of people are talking about AI now. So is there any kind of connection between AI and the technology that you're using at all?
Interesting. And I should say that in this partnership that I'm involved with Joey Chen at Michigan, he is the user and the programmer of the algorithm. I'm the lawyer, the law professor. I do a lot of the writing for us. But when it comes to the details of how the method is really implemented, that's all Joey. That's not me.
Right.
So he could certainly answer better than I could whether AI and Chat GPT have any uses in this area. I don't know offhand. But again, that's not really my focus here, like the nuts and bolts of the technology. So there could be a use that I'm missing with AI, but I just don't know.
Well, I want to thank you again for being a part of this case of Alexander versus South Carolina NAACP. We're all going to be paying close attention to what happens next week and in the coming weeks as the court makes its decision. But this combined with the show that we did on Sunday is going to help people have a better understanding as they go into next week when they hear or see reports about the case being argued. So I want to thank you, and we look forward to what happens next week with the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, terrific. It was my pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me.